Solving for constants is a topic that you would find on some possible SAT test questions. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can solve for constants in level 3 and level 4 type questions. And level 3 and level 4 type questions on the SAT would be considered hard and very hard. So for this one, I'm going to use my basic algebra skills to solve for these equations. You could use the plugin and check, but I think the quicker way would just be basic algebra, your basic algebra skills. So, example 1. For the equation below, a is a constant. What is the value of a? The first thing I notice that they both sides of the equal sign have the plus 10 in it. That means my x terms have to equal each other. So if I have 2ax, that has to equal 14x. Now, since they both have an x, I can just disregard that part and have 2a equaling 14. Now, what do I multiply 2 by to get 14? That would be C, 7. Next question. I have, for example 2, the equation below p is a constant. What is the value of p? So on the left-hand side, I have two binomials, and on the right-hand side, I have the binomials multiplied, so they FOILed it, and it's now in standard form. So what I want to do is solve for p. To do that, I got to look at where the p is located. The p is the first term of the first binomial. So if I were to start the FOIL, I would have px times 7x, which will give us 7px squared. Now the other side, I have a 14x squared. So I would just make that equal to 14x squared because that term has to equal each other. So now I got to think, what do I multiply 7 by to get 14? That would be letter B, 2, because 7 times 2 is 14, so I have 14x squared equals 14x squared. Example 3, for the equation below, a is a constant. What is the value of a? On the right-hand side, I have it all distributed. On the left-hand side, I still have some parts I have to distribute. So I'm going to distribute this negative 4x. So right now, I would have x to the 4th minus 4a x to the 4th, and then minus 12x. Now both sides have a 12x, a minus 12x. That means the other parts, I have x to the 4th minus 4a x to the 4th has to equal 13x to the 4th. So now, if I have a 1 x to the 4th, I have to add a number to 1 to get to 13. Well, I know that 1 plus 12 gives us 13. So if I take negative 4a, that has to equal a positive 12. So to do that, I would divide by negative 4 on both sides, and I'd be left with a equaling a negative 3. So a would be our correct answer for this one. Example 4, for the equation below, m is a constant. What is the value of m? So on the right-hand side, I have a simplified form, simplified binomial, and on the left-hand side, I would have to distribute the 1/4. So if I distribute the 1/4, that gives us 1/4 mx, and then 1/4 times 38 would give us a positive 19 halves. Now you'll notice that both sides have 19 halves, so I can disregard that part and make the other parts equal. Now I also have a plus 2x here on the left-hand side. So I want to get everything into fourths. So I have 1/4 m plus, if I multiply 2 times 4/4, that gives me 8/4. This has to equal 23/4. Now I'm not going to put the x in there because I already know that those are my x terms. So now to get m by itself, or 1/4 m by itself, I'm going to subtract 8/4 on both sides. And now you're left with 23 minus 8, which will give us 15/4. and this has to equal 1/4 m. And to get m by itself, I'm going to multiply by 4 because that's the opposite of dividing by 4. And now I'm left with m on this side, but whatever I do on one side, I do on the other. The 4's divide out, and I'm left with 15. So m would have to be 15. Example 5, for the equation below, a and b are constants. What is the value of a plus b? So the first thing I want to do is get rid of my parentheses. So I'm going to distribute the 5, and I'm left with ax minus 5x minus 35. And this has to equal 13x plus b plus 3. From this point, I want to get all of our x's together, so this x has to equal this x. And if I take the x's out, I'm left with a minus 5 equals 13. Now, to get a by itself, I would add 5 to both sides, and a would have to equal 18. Because 13 plus 5 would give us 18, and 18 minus 5 would give us 13. So I'm halfway there. Now to b, our b's, I would take the next part, which is this negative 35. That has to equal b plus 3. So if I have negative 35, this is going to equal b plus 3. To get b by itself, I subtract 3, and b is going to equal a negative 38. So if b is a negative 38, and a is 18, if I were to take those and add them together, that would give us a negative 20. So letter B would be the correct answer. Example 6 says, for the equation below, what is the value of BC? So I'm going to be multiplying my B and my C together. So here, the right-hand side, I have it all multiplied out. I have to do the same thing on this side. So if I FOIL this, this is going to give us 3bx squared. And then I have 3bx. Then I distribute the next term, so that would be a negative 6 or negative 18x. And then I would have a negative 18. Now for this one, the middle terms have our x's here. Our other side, I have 12x squared minus cx minus 18. From this point, I can figure out my b because right here, 3bx squared has to equal 12x squared. So 3b has to equal 12. That means my b is going to be 4 because 3 times 4 gives us 12. So if this is 4, 3 times 4 is 12. 12 minus 18 is a negative 6x. And this has to equal a negative cx. So if I take out the x's, I'm left with negative 6 equaling a negative c. But I don't want to find out what negative c is. I want to know what c is. So I divide by negative 1 on both sides. And c is going to equal 6. So if I multiply those two together, I would get BC equaling 24. Example 7. For the equation below, the value of a is constant. If the equation has no real solution, what is the value of a? So again, on the right-hand side, I have it all multiplied out. Here I want to distribute, and this is going to give us 3ax plus 6a. And this has to equal 12x minus 2. Now if I put the like terms equal to each other, so our x terms equal to each other, I'm left with 3a equaling 12. That means a is going to give us an answer of 4. And for this to not have any real solutions, the coefficient with our x's have to be the same. So this is going to give us 12x plus, if I put a 4 in for a, that's going to give us 24. and that has to equal 12x minus 2. If I were to get all the x's to one side, I'm going to be left with 24 equals negative 2. That never happens, so therefore no solution. So our A is going to be 4. Example 8. In the equation below, A and B are constants and B cannot be 8.5. If the equation has no real solutions, what is the value of A? So that means our x squared, the coefficient of our x squared have to be identical. So if I distribute that, I'm left with 4x squared plus 2ax squared. This has to equal 20x squared. Now if I take the x squares out, I'm left with 4 plus 2a equals 20. To get 2a by itself, I'm going to subtract 4. I'm now left with 2a equals 16. So I know that 2 times 8 gives me 16, so A has to give me 8. Example 9, for the equation below, the value of A is constant. What value of A makes the equation have infinite solutions? That means any number I could put in for my variable x, it will always work. That means the coefficients of my x term are going to be identical, and then everything else is going to be identical. So if the right hand side equals negative 11x, I need the left side to equal negative 11x. So I'm going to distribute here, so I have 19x minus 5ax minus 15a, or not 15a, negative 15x. And this has to equal a negative 11x. So if I take the x's out, I have 19 minus 15, that gives me 4. 4 minus 5 times a has to give us a negative 11. So if I were to subtract 4 on both sides, I'm left with negative 5a equals negative 15. Divide by negative 5 on both sides, and a is going to give us a positive 3, so a would be the correct answer. Example 10, in the equation below, a and b are constants. If the equation has infinite solutions, what is the value of b minus a? So I need to have the same expression on both sides of the equal sign. So the right-hand side has 15x minus 36. I want the same thing on the left side. So if I distribute the 4, I'm now left with 4ab or ax plus 4b at minus 13x has to equal 15x minus 36. So all my x terms, if I take the x's out, I'm left with 4a minus 13 equals 15. If I were to add 13 to both sides, I'm now left with 4a equals 28. That means my a is going to give us 7. Now to find the b, I would just take the other terms. So I would have 4b has to equal negative 36. And to get b by itself, I just divide everything by 4, and b is going to give us a negative 9. So now if I take b, negative 9, minus our a, which is 7, this is going to give us a negative 16, so that would be choice A. Example 11, which of the following equations has one solution? So if it has one solution, that means the coefficients of our x term are not going to be the same. So if I look at letter A, if I distribute the 4, that they both are going to have 4x, so that can't be true. Letter B, I have a 3x squared here. If I distribute the 3, I have a 3x squared there. That can't happen. Letter C, if I distribute the 3, that's 6x. This one only has a 2x. Therefore, I know I can get the x by itself and get one solution. So letter C would be the correct choice. Some extra example level 3 questions here. So example 1, in the equation, below, a and b are constants. If the equation has no real solution, what is the value of a? So if it's no real solution, your coefficients of your x squared are going to be the same. So this side is 15x squared. That means if I distribute the 4 here, I'm left with a x squared plus 12x squared. That has to equal 15x squared. So if I take the x squareds out, I'm left with a plus 12 equals 15. To get a by itself, I subtract 12. 15 minus 12 is going to give us 3. So B would be our correct answer here. Example 2, in the equation below, j and k are constants. If the equation has infinitely many solutions for x, what is the value of k? So if it's infinitely many, they are going to be identical to both sides, or both sides are going to be the same equations. So if this side is 3/4 x plus 15, the other side has to be 3/4 x plus 15. So if I distribute, I have jx minus jk. This has to equal 3/4 x plus 15. So my x terms have to equal, so that means jx has to equal 3/4 x. And if I take the x's out, I'm left with j equaling 3/4. Now our k, to find our k, all I have to do is put 3/4 in for j times k. This has to equal 15. So to get k by itself, I multiply by -4/3. And I can divide a 3 here, divide a 3 here, and I'm left with 5 times -4. K is going to equal 5 times -4. It gives us a -20. Next is some extra level 4 questions. So example 3, how many solutions does the equation below have? So right here, I'm basically subtracting 2 fractions. And when you subtract fractions, you need common denominators. So the first part, this first expression here on the left, or the first term, I can simplify that. I can divide a 3 out in the top and a 3 out in the bottom. And that's going to leave us with x inside the parentheses. If I factor out a 3, I'm left with 2x minus 4. So right now, the 3's divide out, I'm left with x over 2x minus 4 minus x over 2x minus 4, and this has to equal 0. Well, anything minus itself is 0, so 0 does equal 0. Therefore, it would be D, infinitely many solutions, because both sides would be equal. Example 4, if the equation below is true for all values of all values of x, and if a, b, and c are all positive constants, what is the value of a plus b plus c? Now for this one, on the left-hand side, I have a binomial squared. So I want to expand that. So if I FOIL that or use special products here, I can square the first term, which is 9x squared. And then I would have 3x times 2b square times 2, because this is a perfect square binomial, or perfect square trinomial. So this is going to give us a positive 12xb. And then I square the last term, which would be a positive 4b squared. Now for this one, I'm just using the formula a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, which means I have a plus b squared. So that's what the formula I used for this one. So if that has to equal the right-hand side, I can now find my a, because my x squared, if I take the x squared out, I'm now left with 9 equaling a. So a is 9. Our b is our middle term. But in order to find our middle term, if I put 9 in for a here, I now have 72x equaling 12xb. So if I take the x out, I'm left with 12b equaling 72. To get b by itself, I'm going to divide by 12. And 72 divided by 12 is going to give us 6. So b is going to equal 6. And if b is 6, I can put 6 in for b here. And I have 4 times 6 squared. This has to equal our c. 6 squared is 36, and 36 times 4, that's going to give us 144. And 144 plus 6 is 150, and 150 plus 9 is 159, and that would be the value of a plus b plus c. And our next one here, extra level 4 questions. So example 5, in the given equation, b is a positive integer constant. Which value could be a solution to the equation? So there could be more than one answer here. So if I look at a trinomial here, I know that I can multiply two numbers, and that's going to give me a negative 18. But if I take those same two numbers and add them together, that's going to give us our b here. Now I got to figure out what are a couple numbers I can use to get negative 18. Well, if I look at my answer choices here, I do know 6 and 3 multiply can give me an 18. And I'm going to say a negative 3. And the reason why I'm going to say a negative 3 is because 6 plus a negative 3 is going to give me a positive b number. Because that's going to give us a positive 3. So now if I were to put that in here, so if I have b being 3, I would have x squared plus 3x minus 18. I can factor this. So this would be x plus 6 times x minus 3, because 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. 6 plus a negative 3 is 3. Now if I make each of these equal to 0, here x is going to equal a negative 6, and over here x is going to equal a positive 3. So which is one of the solutions to the equation? This would have to be letter A, which would be 3, and I can put that in here because, like, if I were to put, well, actually we found that b would be 3 here. So that would be our solution for that one. Now, if you were to want to see some more samples or want to test some samples yourself, here is a QR code that you could scan and practice on your own. It will be graded off the right on the spot after you submit it, but that is for some extra practice.